Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. I'm Nick and this is MSFS Flight Plans, a great place to find a video to show your wife when she wants to know why you're spending so much time sitting in your office all night long. Around here we not only fly around the best looking, most interesting spots in the world, but we also stuff our brains to the very brim with knowledge while we do it, and I for one love every single second of it. So today we're going to take a helicopter tour of Charleston, South Carolina, yet another place where I've spent some time living. I was just north of town in Mount Pleasant for 6 months when I got my first job out of college, and I just fell in love with this area. There is so much history and beauty out here, and just a generally chill vibe. I would definitely not complain if I had to move back. And yep, we are taking the default G2 for this trip, but I did get a freeware livery for it since there's only one option available in the sim, and that, of course, with all of the other add-ons for this flight, will be linked in the video description. Let's go ahead and get in and start her up. And I found another freeware G2 available at Flight Sim, made by the same company that made another payware helicopter that I just got that we'll take for another flight at some point. But this one looks really, really nice on the inside compared to that. The other one had pretty good systems depth. I think that was a big thing with that one, but it didn't look quite as nice and polished up inside. All right, so all we have to do is get our carb heat to auto, turn the master on, and I'm going to have to look up the camera. This thing is like way over our head, so I had to make a couple different cameras for this. Okay, mix all the way on. And then fuel pump on. And then throttle, just crack it. And this one, some of the helicopters will adjust the throttle automatically. I actually had to bind my quadrant throttle to this to get it going. So I'm going to have to manually adjust it, which is perfectly fine with me. Let's go ahead and get our map set. Okay, and then the mag and the plasma on, which is probably like an igniter. And then we'll hit the starter, which is way down here. And we'll go ahead and turn the governor on while we're down there. And sometimes you have to start it a couple times, which I just love. We'll see if it goes this time. Sometimes it'll shut itself off. All right, alternator on, and then turn the clutch on, which will make a beautiful crunching clutch noise. And then once that light goes off, we can adjust the throttle up some more. So our departure airport is Charleston Executive, just about 5 miles southwest of downtown, and I'll show you our general route in just a few minutes on the Google map. Listen to that. Awesome. Absolutely love it. Okay, so let's go ahead and make sure that our mixture is on full again. That was a problem last time. There you go. Just crank it a few times. That's good. Why not crank this too? Rotor brake. There we go. Yeah. Okay, just limber everything up. And let's try that again. Give it some more throttle. There we go. I'm going to give it a little bit more throttle this time. All right, that should be good. And we already got the clutch on. Hey. All right, so our precise flight plan, as always, will also be included in the video description, which you may need to modify just a little bit if you want to take a plane out here. And if you don't know how to do that, you can check out our little NavMap tutorial down in the video archives. So I'm just slowly giving it some throttle now, bringing it up to speed. And we do have 4 add-ons for this trip. Well, 5 if you include delivery. All of them are freeware. And this whole city is photogrammetry, by the way. But our man Freaky D did the ports up once again. They're going to look fantastic, way better than they did before. And there's like 3 or 4 of them up there. And they're all over the river. And there's a Lighthouse add-on, a big bridge that looks beautiful, and a water cleanup for the southern end of the river that Mr. Coffee did. Freaky D touched up a little bit by the northern part, but I think some of the other stuff down by the mouth of it was Mr. Coffee. Alright, so we're coming on up to full throttle here. Okay, so while that's going on, let's look at the Google map real quick, and let me zoom out some because I'm going to mention 2 other spots, and I just want to show you spatially where those are. So here's Charleston. Bermuda is one of them. And then way down here, Barbados is the other, and I'll tell you about that in just a second, and why they're significant to Charleston. Okay, so here is the executive airport right here. We're going to come out this way just a little bit so I can get up to altitude, get everything all trimmed out, and I want to tell you a little bit about the history of Charleston while we're out here with nothing to see, because once we get out here, it's just going to be back-to-back stuff the whole time. So we'll come out this way a little bit. There'll be a few little VFR markers that we're looking for to know when to turn. Come around this way, come up to Folly Beach, cruise along this beautiful little barrier island here. All of them are beautiful. And then we'll start hitting the forts out here. So we'll see the lighthouse right here. The add-on's going to be right there. There's going to be a fort here, a fort there. And then the downtown Charleston area, we'll kind of cruise up the main street. All of it's a real historic area up here. The Citadel is right over here, the university. And the original landing spot in Charleston was right over here. So we'll come up there. And we may not check that out, actually. There's not much to see over there. So we may just cut that little short, come over this way, take the bridge out to Mount Pleasant, which looks beautiful. That's also an add-on. And then come down here to an area called Patriots Point, which is awesome. I'm not going to spoil anything about that. Check out Sullivan's Island, cruise along the Isle of Palms just a little bit, and then take this road back up here to Mount Pleasant as we circle back up this way to see some more ports, and then the huge shipyards they've got up here, which look astounding, and then coming into Charleston International. That's our plan. And I would tell you that's our runway right there. Well, we don't need a runway, we're in a helicopter, but I was trying to be cute and taxi this thing in the air down there, and it was just a disaster. So I'm just going to take off and head to the runway, and then take the runway heading. Okay, is everything good to go? Let's get our transponder going. We need that. Ground on out mode. Okay, that's good. All right. And let me just adjust a little nav map a little bit. And by the way, I may have had a big breakthrough for a little nav map. I'll tell you about that in a little bit, and I may need you guys' help with that. I'll fill you in on that in a minute. All right, up we go. The live weather was totally clear, but it was very, very windy, which is not good for flying helicopters, so I just selected the sparse cloud settings in AccuSeason. And if you hear a little mechanical whirring noise in the background, that's me adjusting the trim on this thing, which is a nimble little rascal. And it's about mid-range as far as cruise speed goes for the helicopters. It says it can get up to 100 knots, but we'll probably be between 80 and 90 even if we take the power up to the hilt, which for this one, if you can look on the left side there, where it says 78, 79, 80 now, we'll take it up to 90. Whoa, watch out, bird. Before it gets in the yellow zone, and once we get there, I can start trimming it out. And I'm going to try to stay between 1,000 and 1,500 feet for this one. You hear that little whirring noise? All right, so the first thing that we're looking for up here is a big open green field, and that's when we'll know we need to turn towards the coast. So it's right there in front of us, so we'll just head that direction. And you can really give it full nose-down trim if we get up to full power without it descending. At least I could before, so we'll see how that goes. Just adjusting the collective a little bit. All right, that should be all right for now. So the first European settlers were Brits that were coming out here from Bermuda and Barbados. And you saw how far away those were, and I don't know how they organized that way, way, way back when they came out here. Not like they had cell phones or even telegraphs or anything. And smoke signals wouldn't work. But that's where they came from. And they named their first little outpost Charlestown. Not Charleston, Charlestown, with an E at the end of town. So you know that was British. After landing at a place called Albemarle Point in 1670, and I'll show you where that was. But they didn't stay there for very long, moving all their crap to the current location just 10 years later, which, as you will see, is a significantly better spot if you don't like people sneaking up on you. But once a settlement moved down to the big peninsula between the Ashley and Cooper rivers, it really started to boom as a major trading port due to its central location on the North American coastline. And by 1690, it had become the 5th largest town in the continent. I did not realize it had grown that big. And with the 18th century traders came pirates, lots of them. The town was even besieged by Blackbeard for a while in 1718. Okay, so we're at 1,000 now. We'll see if we can stabilize here. And we've got to keep coming this way because we're going north along the coast. And though most folks associate Charleston with the Civil War, it also played a huge role in the Revolutionary War, getting besieged and bombarded by 90 British ships in 1780. The Crown eventually took the town in the most significant colonial defeat of the war, and they held it for a full year after their surrender at Yorktown. And we saw where that was on our Norfolk flight. So I guess they were kind of getting along with the people down here for a little while, and then eventually people got sick of them and said, all right, you guys have worn out, you're welcome. But leading up to the Civil War, Charleston was the only American city with slaves as the majority of its residents, which sheds a little light on why the locals weren't real keen on changing the laws in that regard. But what a lot of people don't realize is that there were quite a few freed blacks who also owned slaves if they could afford it. I guess it was quite a status symbol back in the day. Alright, just trimming down a little bit. Out here, we're not in the photogrammetry area yet. The fields still look fantastic, but we'll cross over to that area pretty soon. And then it's going to look really good. As the Civil War approached, slavery had become not just an ethical issue, but also economic, crushing the middle class who could not compete with the slave laborers. And this ultimately led to a gentry class comprised of about 4% of the population that controlled more than half the city's wealth. Which is actually even worse today in the U.S., with the top 1% being worth more than 80% of the population. Yes, I had to look that up. But when things finally reached a boiling point, this is the place where the powder keg was lit. On April 12th of 1861, Southern forces under the command of General Beauregard started shelling the Union-held Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, and they continued to do so for a full 34 hours until the Northern defenders surrendered. But what some folks don't realize is that a few months before that, a bunch of cadets from the Citadel shelled the USS Star of the West as it was attempting to enter the harbor to resupply Fort Sumter. And And the ship was hit 3 times but wasn't sunk, so the captain decided to turn back to New York, making that event the actual first shots of the Civil War. So we're going to see a lot of forts on this trip, some still standing, some in ruins, some eventually upgraded to Endicott shore batteries, and a few are just vague outlines of where they used to be, including this first one on our list up here. It's called Fort Palmetto, which is one of 2 by the same name from the Civil War era, and this one was called Palmetto of Coal Island. And the forts got their names because they'd use the trunks of palmetto trees to buttress their walls, but apparently something about the nature of the wood caused the cannonballs to just bounce right off them like rubber, which incidentally is why there is a palmetto tree on the state's flag and why this is called the Palmetto State. Alright, so this fort, like many of the others down here by the water, has all but disappeared, so all we're going to be able to see is a little circular ring where it used to be. And this was the oldest of 6 batteries on this little strip of land out here, being built prior to the War of 1812, and that's where it was, right there. See that little circle? All the others washed away, but this one was made of masonry, so there's just a few little blocks of it still sitting down there. But it never saw any action during the war because the Confederates abandoned it to move further inland, out of range of the Union gunboats. So the Union moved in once the rebels moved out and used it to store provisions and garrison troops for their ensuing assaults on the city of Charleston. We're going to see a lot of tiling out here, unfortunately. Everything else is going to look good except the tiling. And then when we get by the airport, Charleston International, for some reason, with or without add-ons, it is a pretty data-heavy area. So we may get a little stuttering up there, but other than that, I have the graphics turned up really high, and we're staying in the 40s for our frame rates. So you can see that tiling. It's going to be all over the place. Look how beautiful this is out here, though. So this is Folly Island, also a major staging area for the Union during the war, and the name comes from an Old English term meaning dense foliage. And you can see it has a lot more of that than everything to the west until you get over to the mainland over there. And during high tide, a lot of this stuff goes underwater, which is why you'll see a lot of these big, long piers coming from the houses to the left. They look like they're just crossing over land. And some of them even dead end into land. When the tide comes in, those get submerged, or at least submerged enough to tie your boat up. The modern town down here was incorporated in 1951, and as you can see, it is a beautiful area, but they do get a lot of hurricanes out here, which tend to unearth a lot of unexploded ordnance and other relics from the war, which is pretty cool. So I'm sure the bomb squad gets a lot of activity out here. And in case you didn't notice, no high-rise condos anywhere. Another thing I love about this area. In fact, there's no tall buildings of any kind in Charleston. Even in the quote-unquote downtown area, the tallest buildings are really just a hospital they got down there by the medical school. Alright, right up here, this little guy is our first add-on. That's the Morris Island Lighthouse. It's 161 feet high, making it the tallest in the state, but what we see today is not the original light. The first one went up in 1767, but was destroyed along with pretty much every other nautical marker in the South by the Union during the early days of the war. All the way around to Galveston, Texas. Destroyed all of them, except for a few down in Florida, around some... See those docks down there, just going out to dry land? You can tell when the water comes in, those would be deep enough to put your boat out there. I guess the boats just sit in the mud until the water comes back in. But this lighthouse has been so beat up by hurricanes and earthquakes. Yes, earthquakes. Charleston's had several, and some were pretty serious. So they decommissioned this one and built a new one to the north side of the harbor in 1960, which we'll see once we come up over Sullivan's Island. But it looks good as far as an add-on goes. And I guess there used to be some land underneath it too, but it's all just washed away. They've had to do a lot of work just to keep that thing standing. And I do have all the ships turned on. You can see there's just a big long string of them going out there. Coming into all these big ports up here. Alright, this next spot dead ahead is called Morris Island, and almost the whole northern end of this thing was one gigantic fortification called Battery Wagner during the Civil War. And if you've ever seen the movie Glory, this is where that last huge battle took place. And that was actually the second of 2 Union assaults in 1863. The first one a week prior left 339 Northern casualties versus just 12 for the Confederates. And the second, which is the one that was depicted in the movie, was far more devastating for the North, who suffered over 1,500 losses versus just 173 for the South. But the big victory in all that was the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, the first all-black American military unit, which went a long way towards recruiting more black soldiers for the North. I'm sure aiding their war efforts. But the Union finally decided it was better to just keep shelling the place from offshore than to try to take it by land, so they did, for a full 2 months, until it was finally abandoned. And despite its size, it was just an earthworks fort, which doesn't bode well out here on the coast, and within 20 years, it was gone. Used to be right up here in this area. Nothing left but fill from all the dredging nowadays. An incredible feat of engineering, the Union infantry worked only at night to avoid Southern sharpshooters, building a place called the Swamp Battery right down here. Actually, is that it, or is it over here? We'll see. It's one of these little tips out here. It's right down here. Putting a big cannon in there called the Swamp Angel. And they did it at night because Union sharpshooters were trying to pick them off. You can still see what's left of that one, just that little spot right there. But it was out here in the mud, and they hauled a 16,000-pound cannon up there to lob shells at downtown, which they did 36 times before the cannon exploded. And that was it for the Swamp Angel. Apparently they're trying to apply a little bit of pressure to get them to relinquish some of their other positions out here. Alright, so stuff's going to start coming in pretty dense up here, so I won't be able to give you a lot of additional commentary about each site, but I'll show you where all the significant stuff is, so you'll have your bearings if you feel like researching a little bit further. And this first one up here is going to be Fort Sumter, or what's left of it. Before the war, that thing had 2 more stories on top of it, and if you check out some pictures at the end of the war, it was just nothing but piles of rubble. And then they used it for a lighthouse for 20 years after they cleaned out all the debris, and then built some huge cannon batteries in 1898 for 2 massive 12-inch naval guns during the Spanish-American War. You can still see those down here too. So if you want to come out here to visit this place, when I was here anyway, you had to leave from a ferry over there, but I'm kind of wondering if maybe they set something up here or over here to come out there. But it looks really good here in the sim. And if you go down there, they left some of the original ruins down there when they cleaned it all out down on this back part of it, and you can even see some unexploded shells buried in the walls down there, which I thought was just fascinating. There's where the big cannons were for the Spanish-American War. Look at that. You can see the details for the rocks and everything. Very cool. Well, that's a big ship, isn't it? Alright, up on the tip of this island right here are the remains of Castle Pinckney, which was built just prior to the War of 1812. And even though it was fortified for the Civil War, it was only used as a prison. And it's just been sitting there, rotting away for the last 120 years. They don't even let tourists go out there. And there's only 2 other castle-style forts like that still standing in the U.S. Both of them are up in New York Harbor. We saw them on our Big Apple tour. And I'm going to attach a drone video I found, the link for it for YouTube, that flies over that place, because unfortunately it didn't get modeled at all in the sim. It's just totally flat. It definitely has some elevation, but out here, can't see anything of it. There's one of Freaky D's ports. Before I put that in, you couldn't even see the cranes. They were just big blocks of, well, you know what they look like before anyone mods them up. So we're going to come out here, come over this bridge, come back down this way, check out a bunch of other forts. There's the USS Yorktown. That's Patriot Point over there. We'll take a much better look at that in just a little bit. So you'll see a cruise ship right over here. That's a Carnival Cruise Terminal, and their aquarium is right here. And I was working with a power tool company back when I was living out here, so I spent a lot of time in that place while they were building it, which was pretty neat. And as you're going to see when we fly over this, just nothing but old buildings, churches, just a really cool area. And look at that, no tall buildings anywhere. A great place to visit if you like that antebellum style architecture. This right here is called St. Matthew's Church, and this is what the guy that was running the Swamp Angel was using as a target when they were lobbing the shells over here. So that's what he was aiming for. And they said that when the Confederates started shelling Fort Sumter, all the old rich folks out here would come out on all their balconies and hang out down here at the little battery park down on the shore and watch and cheer as they were firing away at that place. There's another big church there. I forgot to look to see what that one was. And I was also part of, they were rebuilding a slave auction house that they have down here that they made into a museum. And I was also, when I was living out here, going down and watching those guys do their work. That was pretty cool. Look at that, though. This is the main drag that runs through here. All the little shops and restaurants and everything are down there. Just beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful area. And this really does it justice. This is just what it looks like. All right, so here's MUSC, the Medical University of South Carolina. And unfortunately, this harbor here, at least it's out of the water, but a lot of it's pretty flat. And you're going to see an interesting building up here. Their little sports complex has a bunch of tennis courts on the roof of it. And there's a helipad down there, which has an add-on. There it is right there. See it? But I didn't put the add-on in our list, but you can get one. It is available. And then this is going to be the Citadel up here. And we're going to fly close enough to look down inside of it. If you've never seen it from the air, it's really cool because in the middle of all the buildings, there's that athletic center. Look at that. Look at all the tennis courts on the roof there. Down inside of the buildings, there's their stadium up there. They've got like courtyards inside of them, and they're like red and white checkered. It looks really neat. Let's fly a little bit closer. So here's where the original Charleston crew landed, right up here. And they got a big park now, and you can even see a fort on the satellite map, which we'll look at the end. But you can't see anything now because it's all treed over, so we won't go check that out. There's their baseball stadium. All right, let's get a little closer so you can see down in here to see the red and white checkered stuff. There's the airport over there. Just having it in view is giving us some stuttering. Look at that. How cool is that? Very neat. Here's the big city park out here. Just such an incredible area. Some more birds flying down there. Alright, so when we come back around, we'll fly past that port, another one that's done up with a huge ship getting loaded up over there, and then here's where the really massive shipyards are over there, so we'll check all that stuff out. And this thing over here, I think from the satellite map, it looks like the footprint of an old fort. It didn't have a marker on it, and it doesn't quite look as good as it did on the satellite map, but you can kind of see where the ramparts would have been and maybe a little moat around it. So we'll check that out at the end too. And this is called Drum Island out here, and I don't know if that's completely man-made or what, but you can see they're just dumping all their dredge dirt up there now, along with this place here and down by where Fort Wagner was. And this thing here is called the Old Charleston Coal Tipple, which way back in the day, they would haul coal out there on little cars and dump it into the ships that were loading and or offloading it. And in real life, part of it is broken down like that, so that piece right there is a big chunk that's missing from it. The Google review said it is not a good place for fishing. You just snag your lines everywhere, so don't go fishing down there. Look how great this bridge looks. So they finished this thing in 2005. I was out here in 1999, and at the time they had two very rickety old truss bridges, which I was always terrified to drive over those things. But they finished this in 2005, and I'm sure it really freed up the traffic going over to Mount Pleasant. And this is really kind of the newer, nicer part of town, or at least it was 25 years ago. But it's just a beautiful area out here. All right, I'm just going to descend a little bit because we're getting kind of high. And there's a fort up here we got to check out. So this area over here is called Patriots Point, and that is the USS Yorktown. And there is so much history associated with that thing that we won't even have time to begin talking about that. And they've got another really interesting little memorial over here called the Cold War Submarine Memorial. And it's something that they built to look like a submarine with the grass going over the top of it, like water cresting over the hull. Really cool. And it's going to be right here, but unfortunately they built... There's a tree right in the middle of it, so I'll show you where it is. You can kind of see the outline of it, but it doesn't look fantastic. Not as good as it does in real life. And I think that thing was pretty old. And this is an old World War II submarine, which is no longer there. They've taken that away for scrap up to Norfolk. And this is maybe a destroyer. I can't remember what the name of that was. Alright, so there's where the Cold War sub memorial is. And you can just kind of see the outline of the sub there. That tree is not there in real life. They built this big kind of thing surrounding it, but that's where it is. And that's right where the grass would be cresting over it, which would be cool if you could see it. And this thing here, I think, is also fairly new. I don't remember that being there when I was out there, unless I just didn't visit it. It's called the Vietnam Experience, and they've rebuilt like a jungle outpost there with a bunch of helicopters and riverboats and stuff. It looked really cool when I was on their website. So if you're down here, you're checking out the Yorktown, check that out too. Look at all these ships. You know, it's weird that the islands didn't get any photogrammetry. Castle Pinckney didn't. None of these other ones did, but the big fill dirt islands seem to have for some reason. Alright, just coming on down, slowly coming on down. I don't want to overspeed if I can avoid it. Alright, so up ahead is Sullivan's Island, which has been populated by all kinds of forts and batteries over the years. The best preserved of all the installations we're going to see on this trip is Fort Moultrie, which is going to be in this green space right up here. A place that saw a lot of action during the Revolutionary War while it was still under construction. And it's roughly the same shape that it is now, way back then, but they replaced the original earthworks and palmetto logs, I should add, with a second fort that got washed away in a hurricane, and they built this masonry one in 1809. But even that one's largely been rebuilt since the Civil War, as it was also reduced to dust by Union gunboats. And you're going to see they've also built up some of those Endicott cannon batteries, and all that stuff was going on in the late 1800s. So this is Battery Jasper right here next to it, and we're going to see two more right over here. And then here's where the fort was. Let's come this way just a little bit so you can see the outline of it because it looks really nice. That's a cool spot. Look at that place. Beautiful. Really, really nice. This whole area was just gorgeous. There's where that new lighthouse was that replaced the Morris light. Look at that. And of course they ruined it by putting some Endicott batteries in there. Alright, see this thing right here? This was called Battery Capron. Well, it's still called that. And when I lived out here, it's all filled in with dirt now, but when I lived out here it was open. It was a place where they had a bunch of mortars, huge mortars. And it wasn't a tourist attraction or anything, so you could just kind of park in there and walk up a little path and go in there and explore it, which was just awesome because nobody else was in there. Very cool. Alright, these are batteries Gadsden and Thompson. There's one right here and another one right here, and now they've built a big elementary school here, which is not done here in the sim, obviously. So there's some of the batteries there, and then there's the other one over here. Those are both Endicott batteries. Look at this beach. Look how good it looks. This is a great little community out here. But as beautiful as it is today, it has a very tragic history. The island was the quarantine location for all the slaves being imported for sale in Charleston. So this is where all those slave ships were landing. And just to let you know how Wikipedia feels about Sullivan's Island, they said as many as 40% of slaves brought into America landed here. And in the very next sentence, they said it's possible that 100% of African Americans can trace their ancestry to this place. So I'll let you work out that math. But on a much less controversial note, this next strip is called the Isle of Palms, which doesn't appear to have much in the way of military or slave history. However, the doomed Confederate submarine H.L. Hunley departed from this little inlet right here before sinking the USS Housatonic, going down in history as the first submarine to do that. But unfortunately, it was a little bit too close to her target when the torpedo on her spar exploded, like within 20 feet, I think. And she wound up sinking herself. And after searching for it for years and years and years, they finally found it and raised it in the year 2000. And we'll see where she's displayed now, just before we land. It's up by the shipyards. Alright, I'd forgotten all about it until I flew out here and saw this, but this bridge here reminded me of a story. I told you guys a story about my debauchery in Cincinnati if you saw that flight. Well, this happened even before that. I'd really cleaned myself up by the time I got to Cincinnati. I wasn't even married yet when I was living out here. But I was out here on this beach one night, had a little bit too much to drink with some of my buddies, and drove back home along this road back to Mount Pleasant in nothing but my underwear, wearing aviator glasses. Yes, I even had the bug back then. And somehow a cop sitting down here on this road saw me wearing sunglasses at night, decided to pull me over, came and saw I was wearing nothing but my underwear, had me get out of the car, and gave me a field sobriety test for like 45 minutes. But what he didn't know was one of my specialties was passing field sobriety tests. So after he couldn't nab me for any of those, he told me to say the alphabet backwards. And this is back before cell phones or anything, so I couldn't say, I'm a sovereign citizen. Not that I would anyway. But one of my other parlor tricks was being able to say the alphabet backwards. So I sang it to him backwards. And he just looked over at my buddy and said, can you drive? Take this idiot home. So I was very lucky that night. Okay, the reason I'm coming all the way over here, other than to tell you that story, is look at this. This is a private runway out here. And this whole area is called Ravens Run, and that's called Ravens Run Airport. And the other Fort Palmetto, by the way, is right down here. And I don't know why they built it all the way up here. But you can't see anything in the sim. There's a little tower down there now we'll look at in the satellite map. I don't know, but maybe they were worried about ships trying to come in behind the barrier islands, but that seems set back pretty far. And this is the farthest one from the city that I could detect. Look at that strip. How cool is that? And you can tell where the photogrammetry ends. Right here, you can see it jagged and a little bit crossing that runway right there. Alright, if we're going to get any stuttering, it's going to start to be up in this area as we get closer to the airport. I don't think it has anything to do with Freaky D's add-ons, because even before I put them on, I was getting some stuttering. But those are free, and I would definitely stick them in there because the ports look significantly better now. And this one has so many containers, it's unbelievable. Look at the size of that tower there. Alright, how's our wind looking? About a 4 knots coming off from our left. Not too bad. And I think if you guys are from the south and you've ever heard of Sticky Fingers Barbecue, I think the very first one was out here in Mount Pleasant. Because I remember hearing something about that. They had one right down the street from us that closed a few years ago, but the original one is down here on this strip somewhere. And the place where I lived was called Sandpiper, and I could not it's somewhere on this main drag, but I couldn't find it. It may not be called that anymore because I couldn't even find it. So a quick little story as we're heading over to the shipyards. When I was down there downtown helping the guys build the aquarium, doing the slave house, refurbishing and all that, they had to dig a big hole in the ground. And I said, hey, and they had just all the debris from the hole piled up in a gigantic heap next to where they were digging it. And I said, you guys ever find any artifacts down here? I figured they probably had to. And they're like, do we ever? I said, what do you find? He's like, well, go over there and look in yourself. He's like, just dig around in that pile over there. So I started rummaging around through the pile they'd built up over there, and I found just tons of these clay pipes that people used to smoke back in the day, and they had really long stems on them. So you'd find the bowls of them and then just tons and tons of little stems. And I don't know how, I never found a complete one, so I'm guessing it was probably 9, maybe even 12 inches long with a stem on it. And I said, do you guys know why these are all broken up like this? And they said, yeah, they would just leave the pipes like sitting in the taverns and the pubs, and the next guy that would come along would just break a little piece off the end of it so he didn't have to get the other guy spit in his mouth. And they'd start smoking it again. And they'd just throw little stems on the ground or, wherever else. And I was like, wow, that is fascinating. So I had a huge pile of those things, which unfortunately have since been lost. They got some big houses out here, by the way. Look at these. Look at some of these down here. Look at that place. This is definitely the high rent district. And then while I was down at a big market they have downtown there, I found a book that contained a Civil War map. It wasn't a Civil War age book, but it was kind of like a reprint or something, modern reprint. And on the inside cover of it was a map of all of Charleston, the surrounding area, that showed where all of the earthworks were around town. And I started wondering myself if any of those were still standing. So I kind of overlaid a regular old map, because we didn't have Google and GPS back then, and went around to all these neighborhoods and out in the woods if I could get to it to see if I could find them. And I found most of them. They were still there. Not huge, but you could definitely see where the dirt mounds were. Some of them were right in people's front yards. It was amazing. Look at that port down there. So that's called the Wando River right there. And that's called the Wando Terminal. Oh, we won't look at that bridge. Doesn't look great. But that port looks good. Look at the size of that ship down there. Amazing. And one more quick story before we get back over here to these big shipyards. When I was touring the Yorktown, there was a guy that was visiting, again, so this was 25 years ago, who had served on it during World War II. And I just kind of started walking around with him, and he was telling me some stories that were just unbelievable. I mean, that thing saw some incredible action during World War II. And he was talking about all the kamikaze attacks and stuff they had to suffer through, and I was just absolutely fascinated by it. I bet not too many of those guys are alive anymore, which is too bad. Alright, so we're going to come up this way and just brush along the edge of this big set of piers up here, because it looks fantastic. There's the coal tipple again. So the former location of the Charleston Navy base is down on the northern end of all of these piers here. I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get going. But I also had to come out here because there were some people that were shooting a movie. I don't even know what the movie was. It was some kind of B-flick, some horror movie or something. And they wanted a bunch of our power tools, and I was always hauling truckloads of them around, and they thought it'd be good marketing just let them use our power tools, which they destroyed, by the way. But I got to come around on this base, which was really kind of eerie, because by then the base had been shut down for a few years, and they still had a lot of the base structures, like the houses and everything, but they were just vacant, which were out in this area here, and it was just really creepy to drive around there. Weeds growing up through everything. Really wild. But this place was a big deal for a while. It was built in 1901, and they closed it in 1996. And it was originally built just as a shipyard to help Charleston recover from the economic devastation of the Civil War. But World War I brought on a big boom as they were using it to repair and refit a lot of the ships that were damaged during that. And then World War II, it really exploded. They had 55,000 people that moved to Charleston to work this base. And now it's just a bunch of private companies that are either ship breaking or refitting. And it looks like these are the exact same types of ships that were out here the last time I was out here. And I don't know what those are. I don't know if they're retired military ships. They certainly have that color, don't they? But they look good. And they got a little Coast Guard station, and a lot of just private companies have all this space now. But once the Cold War rolled around, this place's role shifted to submarines, particularly the kind carrying nukes, as it became the Navy's primary support base for the ballistic fleet. So if you served on a submarine during World War II, there's a pretty good chance you spent some time out here, and maybe even up in Groton, Connecticut, which is where I was born, if you saw that trip, on the submarine base. And by 1983, this was the third largest military port in the U.S. But with the end of the Cold War, just 13 years later, they shut it down. Okay, the place where the Hunley is today is, I think, this little building right here. Look at all the rust and stuff on all these barges and everything. I mean, they really just nailed that. And you know what? We're not getting a lot of stuttering either, which is great. And this is the historic, they call it the historic naval shipyards, and you can see it does have a very historic-looking edifice up there. And these things here are dry docks, and they even have ships in them. So we'll take a peek at that. Look at that thing just rotting away there. Awesome. That's also in dry dock. That looks like the same kind of ships that were back there, those military-looking ones, but that one's had the paint stripped off of it. So here's the other dry docks. There's one there, and there's one here. Look at that. That is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Alright, they got a little train yard right over here that looks pretty nice, and over here is the Coliseum, and their convention center is right here next to that. That looks like it could be a helicopter pad, doesn't it? But when I come see that thing right there, that's what we're going to try to come into. And once we're done, be sure to stick around for our view of the satellite map. There's a lot of stuff you'll be able to see better from there, or stuff that we just couldn't fly out to. I'll show you where the original Charlestown was. And check out a few other spots. Oh, there's a bigger train yard over there. I didn't notice that before. Look at this. That's nothing like the one in Cincinnati, but that's pretty big. And those are some long trains over there. And if you haven't done it yet, be sure to check out our Discord server. That place is mountains of fun. And maybe if you're real lucky and you can be really quiet, I'll even let you fly along with me if you turn your mic off while I record a flight. I just thought of that this afternoon, if anyone's keen on doing that. And of course I'm taking test flights all the time. And I'll post those on there. And here's the thing I need you guys help with. I've had many people ask since we started the channel, you know, because if you import the flight plan, it'll bring the flight plan into a little nav map, but you can't see any of the bookmarks. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, because you haven't been around for the tail end of any of our videos, hang out for just... That looks like a movie theater right there. Look at that. That's got to be what that is. But you got to try to find all the things I've bookmarked, which has got to be kind of a pain in the butt. I mean, you'd fly over them if you follow the flight plan, but you wouldn't know where to look for them. So on our Discord server, I just posted a link that should bring all of our bookmarks for all of our flights into your version of Little NavMap if you open that link up while you're in Little NavMap. So I needed someone to hop in there, check it out. I posted it under our announcement section, I think. If someone could check that and make sure it's working, then that would be a huge boon for everybody. Because I know that would make everyone's life a lot easier if you're trying to track along just as we are. That noise is the trim, by the way. I'm trimming the nose up. Perfect little spot right there, isn't it? And I'm very rarely starstruck. On a day-to-day basis, I work with people with millions and millions of dollars. I'm not into professional sports. But I got very excited yesterday, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying it, but one of my heroes, my flight sim heroes, you've heard me mention his name many times, including this flight. Our man Freaky D has joined our Discord server. Couldn't believe it. I was so excited. So excited. And I mean that really. I don't get excited to... Fame doesn't faze me at all, but someone who dedicates that much effort to the flight sim community, I'd always dreamed of getting to meet someone like that. Couldn't believe when he joined us, so welcome Freaky D. So glad to have you, man. So cool. Alright, let's see if I can put this thing down. And all of our other members, of course. Appreciate all you guys. Love all you guys. Long-time members. Start pumping out some mods. I'll give you props, too. Alright, here we go. Nice and easy. Just put her on down. Put her down and shut her down. And the rotor brake on this thing does not work very well, so we're just going to let it wind itself down. I mean, it works, but you got to hold it forever. We're not going to do that. Alright, let's see if I can get it in the center. I know it probably doesn't matter to you guys, but it matters to me. Alright. It's hard to get it in just a really stable hover with this thing, so once we get down, it's just going to kind of thump down. If I yank up the collective, it's going to shoot back up in the air. Oh. Well, that wasn't too bad at all. I'm not down yet, though. Oh, see, it just kind of drops those last few feet. And I'm sliding a little bit. Alright, let's just get on the ground. That wasn't too bad. Okay, so let's see if we can shut this thing down. I keep wanting to reach for a parking brake, but we don't have one. Alright, what's the best way to do this? Let's go ahead and shut our throttle down, take that down, and we gotta look up here and cut off the mixture and the mags. Is he gonna let me do it? There we go. Mixture off. Mags off, that off, then we'll shut off the battery. And everything else. Okay. Little nav map. Look at all these ships. That's awesome. We saw most of those too. Alright, so here's how I drew this out. Again, it should be pretty good for a plane. I took the runway heading out of here. This is probably a mile, mile and a half maybe to come out here. So if you're taking a slow plane like a Bush plane or a Cessna or something, you should be fine. Single engine Cessna. The only real sharp turns would probably be in this area here. Everything else is pretty smooth. And I even gave you a 3-mile run up to get into the airport if that's how you want to do it. But you might need to adjust this one a little bit. Okay, so let's see what all we had here. So the first one that we saw was Fort Palmetto on Coal Island. And it looked just like that in the sim. That's all that's left of it. So again, there were 5 others that were out here somewhere. Have no idea where they were. They've all been washed away because they were earthworks. That's all that's left of that one because that was masonry. And here's Folly Island out here, which looked fantastic. And then we saw the Morris Island light. And boy, in the sim, it must have been high tide because none of that stuff was even there. And this wasn't to mark this channel, by the way. This was to mark Charleston Harbor. That's why they had this out here. And you can see it's kind of a good ways away from it, but that's what that was for. And here's the Marsh Battery. This is where the Swamp Angel was. And you can see it look about like that in the sim. So that was cool, which unfortunately we couldn't see Fort Wagner. So this is where it was, somewhere out in here. And I tried to look at some Civil War maps to the best anyone could draw them without being able to fly over it. And it looked like it may have been even a little bit further up here, and it had a big moat going all the way around it. And there may have even been still Southern soldiers in there while they were building this thing. Because if I was reading that correctly, and there's a good chance I wasn't, that was what they were really concerned about, because obviously there weren't any soldiers stationed out here that could hit them from there. So I think that's why they were building it at night. There may have still been Confederates in Fort Wagner over here. And then they started lobbing shells all the way over here to downtown Charleston. So here's Fort Sumter, which also looked just like that. And there's where they put the two big guns in for the War of 1812, which they never had to use. Which only lasted for about a year, I think. And then we came over downtown Charleston, and my original plan was to come a little bit closer to downtown, but we didn't. We still saw everything. That was just fine. And then here is the big church that they were aiming at with the Swamp Angel. And then here is the... I only marked this. This is the city market. This is where I picked up that book that had all the earthworks on that map in it, which is pretty cool. And the slave auction house was this place right here. And they were rebuilding that, and that's where the big pile of dirt was next to it while they were fixing that place up, where I found all those little pipes. And then here's their aquarium. They were also building that while I was out here. One of the largest, tallest wise anyway, tanks I've ever seen inside of an aquarium. That was pretty cool. It's like 3 or 4 stories high. So here's the medical university here. There's a little helipad. There's that building we saw with the tennis courts on it. Looked phenomenal. And then here's the Citadel out here. There's the big stadium. And then there's those red and white courtyards I got in there. Very cool. There's a girl that plays on my daughter's soccer team in high school that just got accepted there. Scholarship for soccer, which is pretty neat. And then here's where the original landing spot was. So again, just to kind of show you, it was really close to here. Why they decided to go there instead of here beats me. Maybe they thought this was all land out here. I don't know. But if I had my choice, I would have taken that spot. But they took this little spot right here. And if you look way down in here, you can see they've got some little... Actually, the Google Map's even better because the shadows aren't as bad. But there's some cannons down here. And then this is one of the original parapets, or where they think the original parapets was. And then this is the parking out here. They got some of the little stuff going on here. But that's kind of neat. You couldn't see anything in the sim, though. Big park was right there. There's the... Where's the coal tipple? There's the coal tipple over there. Which is now, you can see that part that's broken away from it right there. Don't fish out there unless you want to lose your lines. There's the Ravenel Bridge, which looked phenomenal. And then here's where that submarine is. And I don't know why they put a tree on them, but look at that. Look how the grass goes up over the top of it. It's pretty neat. I mean, all you do is look at it. There's nothing to really tour or anything. It's not a real submarine, but that's pretty cool. And there's the tail fin sticking out of there. I thought that was really neat. Got some pictures by that when I was living out there. Here's the Yorktown, and they have one of the Apollo capsules on this thing, too. I think that was one of the things that this baby did. Retrieved one of the Apollo capsules when it came in. This is the USS Laughley, and this is the Clagamore, I think it's called. Clamagore. That's the submarine that was down there, which is not there anymore. We're scrapping that bad boy. A couple big hotels down there on the water. And then we came down to Sullivan's Island. Here's Fort Moultrie, which looked exactly like that in the sim. Looked fantastic. And I tried to spot these in the sim. These are a bunch of cannons they have lined up there, but I couldn't see those in the sim, unfortunately. And there's where they ruined it with the Endicott batteries. At least they kept the outer shape pretty much the same. And there's Battery Jasper, which also looked just like that. And where is the lighthouse? Can we see that? There it is right there. So that's the new lighthouse right there. Which doesn't look that great in the sim until you get right on it. It looks kind of blocky until you're like right there. And here's those 2 other batteries. And look, this was all under construction in the sim, but they built an elementary school right next to these things. Can you imagine how many skin knees are going to happen out there? Well, that would be incredible. Having an elementary school right by a bunch of stuff like that you could climb over. And I think they might even have some underground bunkers here you can go in, which would be really, really cool. And then here's where that spot was that had the big mortars. So you could just park right over here somewhere. I can't remember where I parked, but you walk up here through a bunch of trees, and then this was all open, and it was pretty deep too. I think they had 4 big mortars in there that were post-Civil War, but it was a pretty cool place. They probably had a lot of people doing who knows what in there. That's probably why they filled it in, but that's too bad. Could have made a park or something out of it. And then here's that little inlet where the Hundley came out of before she... And I don't know where they found that thing, actually. I don't know where she blew up that ship, but she probably sank somewhere pretty close to that. I think it might have been in Charleston Harbor, but that's where she came out of. And this is the Isle of Palms out here, and then we came this way. That's the bridge where I blew the mind of the police officer that was trying to take me in for a DUI. And I wasn't terribly, terribly intoxicated, but enough to probably be wearing clothes driving at night without sunglasses on. And here's that big grass strip, Ravens Run. And then here is where that other fort is. That's it right there. So that was the other Palmetto Fort. And I think there might be something to see down underneath the trees here, but they got a little park, and everybody was complaining because they built this big neighborhood out here, and it was disrupting the park or whatever, but... Again, that seems strange to me that they would build it that far from all the action and way up here, but they must have been concerned about someone trying to sneak through here, because they had Moultrie down here if anyone was coming in this way, but they were probably concerned about someone coming in here. And here's where they've carved out or dredged out part of the intercoastal. We've seen that on several of our flights so far. Okay, then we came up by the Wando shipyard, which looked incredible. Again, good job, Freaky D. Came over the big base here, what used to be a base. And there's all those ships, look just like that there. One of these, I think, is also a museum now. But it's kind of a pain probably to get down in there. And then here's where the Friends of the Hunley is. Oh, I misidentified that. I thought it was this, which is hard to pick out because it looks like all these other buildings. So that's the one right there. That's where the Hunley is if you want to go look at it. And I didn't see what that looks like inside. And then here's the old Charleston Naval Yard. And you could see in the sim it looked a lot better because you could see the brickwork on the front of that, which was cool. Had a bunch of ships in the dry docks there. That was amazing. That looked really good. You could see every little piece of junk and everything they got down there. Look at all this stuff. You could see that too. I didn't point out in the sim, but on my test flight I saw it. It looks just like that. Crap all over the place. Wonderful. And then we came on in here, and here's where the Coliseum is and the Convention Center. The big train yard that we saw. And then we came on into our little helicopter landing spot. So that's it, guys. That's Charleston. If I was incorrect about anything or you know more about this area than I did, feel free to let us know down in the comments. Upcoming flights will be the flight over Cairns in Australia and the flight over Budapest, Hungary. Those are at least 2 of them we have coming up, probably sooner than later. I might throw another lunch break flight in there somewhere since we couldn't quite get that last one short enough to be qualified as a lunch break. But I can't wait to see you guys again in the skies. Later.